I never thought a letter could make me cry this much. It wasn't even written on fancy paper, just plain white, folded in half, with the words approved stamped in blue ink at the bottom. But for me, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. For years, John and I had prayed for a child. We had tried everything: doctors, treatments, endless nights of hope and disappointment. Our house in Cedarville, a quiet little town in Ohio, felt too big, too quiet, too perfect for just the two of us. Every corner reminded me of what we didn't have: the nursery that stayed untouched, the swing in the backyard that never moved. But that letter, it was the start of something new. It meant that after all the interviews, background checks, and home visits, we were finally approved to become foster parents. My hands trembled as I held it. John came in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "Is that it?" he asked softly. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He pulled me into his arms, and for the first time in years, I cried, not out of pain, but out of hope. We didn't know then who our first child would be. But I had already imagined her 1,000 times, a little girl who needed a home, who needed love. Someone who would finally make our family feel whole. A week later, we got the call. Her name was Grace Parker, 12 years old. She had been in the system for 3 years, moved from one home to another. Her caseworker said she was quiet, bright, but guarded. I smiled through tears as I listened. "We'd love to meet her," I said without hesitation. When Grace arrived, she carried everything she owned in one small purple suitcase. Her hair was tied in a messy ponytail, and her eyes, big and brown, didn't look up much. I remember kneeling down to her level and saying, "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Emily. You can call me whatever you like." She gave a shy nod, clutching her suitcase tighter. John smiled and said softly, "Welcome home, Grace." Those two words, "welcome home," seemed to echo in the hallway. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Hope, maybe. Or fear. That night, after showing her the room we'd prepared, she sat silently on the edge of her bed. The walls were painted a soft lavender, her favorite color according to the file. I had added a small bookshelf and placed a stuffed bear in the corner. "Do you like it?" I asked gently. She shrugged. "It's nice." Her voice was so small it almost broke me. I smiled anyway and said, "You don't have to talk much right now. Just rest, okay? You're safe here." She looked at me for a long moment, really looked, and then whispered, "Thank you." That was the first time I saw her smile, even if it lasted just a second. The first few weeks were quiet, but peaceful. Grace was polite, respectful, and always tried to help. She loved reading, especially stories about space and stars. Every night before bed, she'd sit by the window, looking at the sky like she was searching for something far away. One night, I joined her and said, "You really like stars, huh?" She nodded. "They don't move around. They just stay. I like that." I swallowed hard. "You've moved around a lot, haven't you?" She didn't answer, just kept looking up. But her silence said enough. That night, when I went to bed, I prayed silently, "Please, God, let her stay." My parents didn't know yet. You see, my parents, Linda and Robert Miller, were the kind of people who cared more about appearances than feelings. My mother was a retired teacher, always proper, always judgmental. My father, a businessman, believed in keeping the family image clean. They had never approved of the idea of fostering. "You don't know where those kids come from," my mother once said. "They could bring trouble, Emily." But I didn't care. I thought once they met Grace, they would fall in love with her. One Sunday afternoon, I invited them for dinner. I made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and Linda's favorite, peach cobbler. Grace helped me in the kitchen, carefully setting the table, her small hands trembling slightly. "Are they nice?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I smiled. "They can be. They just take time to warm up." When the doorbell rang, Grace almost dropped a plate. I squeezed her shoulder gently. "It's okay. They're just people like us." But deep down, I was nervous too. Dinner started off well enough, polite smiles, awkward small talk. My mother asked Grace about school, and Grace answered softly, always looking down. My father just nodded between bites, barely speaking. But then, my mother asked the question I had been dreading. "So, Grace, where are your real parents?" I froze. Grace's fork stopped midway. She glanced at me, panic flickering in her eyes. I said quickly, "Mom, we don't need to," but my mother continued, "I just mean, it must be difficult, being away from them." Grace whispered, "They didn't want me." Her voice cracked. My mom said I ruined her life. The table went silent. I felt anger rise in my chest. "Mom, that was inappropriate." But she only sniffed. I was just making conversation. After dinner, Grace went upstairs quietly. I stayed behind to help clean up. My father spoke first. "Emily, we just worry about you. These foster situations, they can be messy." "Messy?" I snapped. "She's a child, Dad. Not a problem to be fixed." My mother sighed. "You can't save everyone, Emily. Some kids just don't fit." That was the moment something broke inside me. When they left, I went upstairs to check on Grace. She was sitting on her bed, hugging the stuffed bear. "I'm sorry," she whispered before I could even speak. I didn't mean to make them mad. I sat beside her, tears filling my eyes. "Sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong." "They did." She looked at me, uncertain. "Are you going to send me back?" The question shattered me. "Never," I said firmly, pulling her into my arms. "You are home now, Grace. No one is sending you anywhere." She cried quietly against my shoulder. I stroked her hair and promised silently that I would fight the whole world for her if I had to, but I didn't know then that I would have to prove that promise sooner than I ever imagined, because the next morning my mother called. And what she said made my knees go weak. "Emily," she began in her cold, measured voice, "your father and I have discussed it, and we don't want that girl in our family gatherings. She's not one of us." I stood there, speechless. "Mom," I whispered, "she is my family now." "Well," she said sharply, "then maybe you should choose which family matters more." The call ended. And that was the day everything changed. That was the day I realized real love, sometimes demands you stand alone. The silence in our house that morning felt heavier than ever before. It wasn't the usual peaceful quiet that I loved, it was the kind that pressed against your chest, making it hard to breathe. I stood in the kitchen, phone still in my hand, staring at the sunlight hitting the window, trying to process what my mother had just said, "Choose which family matters more." The words echoed in my head like a cruel dare. My mother had always been firm, sometimes cold, but never like this. Never so heartless. John walked in, already dressed for work, sipping his coffee. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my expression. I swallowed hard. "My parents don't want Grace at family gatherings. They said she's not one of us." He set his mug down slowly. "What?" I nodded, forcing back tears. "They told me to choose, John. Them or her." For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just rubbed his temples and sighed. "Emily, you knew they might react this way. I hoped they'd be better than this." He looked at me, really looked at me, and said softly, "Then we'll just be her family. That's enough." His words were simple, but they meant everything. Grace came downstairs a few minutes later, wearing her blue hoodie and carrying her school backpack. She looked nervous, like she could sense something was wrong. "Good morning," she said quietly. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Pancakes?" She nodded. I watched her sit at the table, her small hands fiddling with a fork. She had started to relax around us lately, laughing sometimes, helping me bake cookies, even humming along to the radio. But I knew how fragile that trust still was. As she ate, she said softly, "Mrs. Carter, sweetheart, it's Emily." I corrected gently. She smiled faintly. "Okay, Emily. Are your parents mad at me?" I froze. "Why would you think that?" I asked. She hesitated. "Because last night, they didn't smile much. And your mom looked like she didn't like me." I took her hand across the table. "Grace, listen to me. Sometimes grown-ups have small hearts. But that's not your fault. You did nothing wrong." She looked down. "People always say that. But they always leave anyway." My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her I would never leave, but promises like that had already been broken too many times in her life. So instead, I just said, "You're safe here. That's all you need to remember." The next few weeks were tense. My parents stopped visiting. My mother's weekly phone calls became monthly, then stopped altogether. She didn't even call on my birthday. John tried to keep things normal. We went to Grace's school play, helped her with science projects, spent weekends at the park. Grace started smiling more, and I began to believe we were finally building something real, until one Sunday afternoon, when everything came crashing down. We were at the grocery store when I noticed Grace staring at the door. Her face went pale. "Grace? What's wrong?" she whispered. "That man." I turned and saw a tall man in his 30s, rough-looking, with tired eyes and a faded denim jacket. He looked directly at Grace, and my stomach dropped when he said, "Grace Parker." She froze, clutching my sleeve. "Who are you?" I demanded. He raised his hands. "Name's Kyle. I'm her father." The world seemed to tilt for a second. Before I could respond, Grace shook her head violently. "No, you're not. You said you didn't want me," she screamed, her voice shaking. People turned to stare. My heart pounded as I wrapped an arm around her. "Kyle, I think you should leave," I said sharply. He looked guilty, but also desperate. "I just wanted to see her. I'm clean now. I've been sober for a year. I got a job. Please leave," I repeated. My voice cracked, but I stood firm. "She's not ready for this." He looked at Grace one last time, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, kiddo." Then he walked out. Grace clung to me, sobbing. "Don't let him take me. Please. I don't want to go back." I hugged her tight. "He won't, sweetheart. I promise." But deep down, I knew things weren't that simple. That night, after Grace finally fell asleep, I sat on the porch with John, my hands trembling around a cup of tea. "He can't just show up like that, can he?" I asked. John sighed. "If he's her biological father, and he's trying to get custody back, he might have the right to file for it." My heart dropped. "No, he can't. She's finally happy here. He can't take her away." John reached over and squeezed my hand. "Then we'll fight for her. Whatever it takes." I nodded, wiping my tears. But I knew we were about to step into something far bigger than we had expected. A week later, I received a notice from the county court, a custody hearing. Kyle had filed for partial custody. When I told Grace, she panicked. "I won't go," she said, shaking her head. "He yelled at me. He used to leave me alone for days." "I don't want to go." I held her tightly. "You don't have to, honey. The judge will hear your side too." She looked up at me, eyes wide and full of fear. "What if they make me leave?" "They won't," I whispered, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The first court hearing was brutal. Kyle spoke about his recovery, his job, how he wanted to be a better man. His lawyer painted a picture of redemption and second chances. I wanted to believe in second chances. I really did, but not at the cost of Grace's heart. When it was my turn, I told the judge everything. How Grace cried herself to sleep for the first month. How she hid food under her bed out of habit. How she finally smiled again. The judge listened carefully. He was kind but firm, a man in his 60s with silver hair and thoughtful eyes. His name was Judge Thompson. At the end of the hearing, he said, "We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. Until then, temporary custody remains with Mrs. Carter." I exhaled, weak with relief. Grace was safe for now, but news travels fast in small towns. Within days, my mother found out about the court case. She called me after months of silence. "Emily, I heard about that foster girl's father trying to take her back. Maybe it's for the best." "For the best," I repeated in disbelief. "You think taking her from a loving home is best?" "Emily," she said sharply, "you're not her real mother. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. "You know what, Mom?" I said, tears streaming down my face. "You're right. I'm not her real mother. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who loves her when nobody else did. I'm the one who'll fight for her when everyone else walks away. So no, I'm not her real mother. I'm her forever one." And I hung up. That night, I wrote a letter of my own, this time to the judge. I poured my heart into it, explaining why Grace wasn't just a foster child. She was my daughter. I didn't know if it would make a difference, but I had to try, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of losing my parents. I was only afraid of losing my child. The day started with rain, the soft, quiet kind that made the whole world smell like wet earth and memories. Grace loved the rain. She always said it sounded like the sky whispering secrets. That morning, though, she didn't say a word. She sat by the window, her face pale, watching the drops slide down the glass. I was packing her lunch for school, but she didn't touch her cereal. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "you've barely eaten." She shrugged. "I just don't feel hungry." I set the lunchbox aside and sat next to her. "Is it because of the hearing next week?" She nodded. "What if the judge thinks I should live with him? What if he thinks I'm ungrateful?" I took her hand. "Grace, that judge has eyes. He can see the truth. He'll see how much we love you." She looked up, eyes full of tears. "You really think love matters in court?" Her words broke something inside me. Because she wasn't wrong, sometimes love didn't matter enough in the places where it should. I pulled her close. "In my world, it does. And I'll make sure it matters in his too." The next few days were a blur of paperwork, calls with the social worker, and sleepless nights. John tried to stay calm, but I could see the worry in his eyes every time he looked at Grace. One evening, after she had gone to bed, I sat on the couch staring at the letter I'd written to the judge. It was still sealed, waiting on the coffee table. John came over and sat beside me. "You sure you want to send that?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said. "He needs to know who she is to us. Not just a name on a file." He nodded. "Then send it." I did. The next morning, I dropped the letter in the mailbox, praying that somehow those words would reach not just his desk, but his heart. 3 days later, something unexpected happened. I was folding laundry when a car pulled up outside. A sleek black sedan with government plates. My stomach twisted when I saw the man who stepped out, Judge Thompson. I froze at the window, unsure if I should open the door or pretend not to be home. But before I could decide, he was already walking up the steps. When I opened the door, he smiled kindly. "Mrs. Carter?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice nervous. "May I come in for a moment?" "Of course." He stepped inside, removing his hat, his presence calm but commanding. Grace peeked out from the hallway, her eyes wide. "Hello, Grace," the judge said gently. "I'm Judge Thompson. I just wanted to talk for a bit, if that's all right." Grace glanced at me for reassurance. I nodded. We sat in the living room. The rain outside grew heavier, filling the silence between us. "I received your letter," the judge began, turning to me. It was one of the most heartfelt letters I've read in a long time. I swallowed hard. "I just wanted you to know she's more than a case number." He nodded slowly. "That's clear. But I also wanted to see for myself." He looked around the house, the bookshelf filled with Grace's favorite novels, the half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, the framed family photo we'd taken at the park last month. Then he turned to Grace. "Do you like it here?" Grace hesitated, then nodded. "I love it here. It's quiet. Safe." "What do you love most about it?" he asked gently. She thought for a moment. "Emily hugs me every morning. And John helps me with math. And no one yells." My throat tightened. The judge smiled faintly. "That sounds like a good home." Grace looked down. "It is." Then, softly, she added, "But he's trying to take me away." The judge's expression grew serious. "Grace, I can't promise anything yet. But I can promise I'll listen." She nodded quietly. After Grace went upstairs to read, the judge and I spoke alone in the kitchen. "She's bright," he said. "And she trusts you." That's not easy for a child who's been through what she has. I nodded, tears threatening again. "I just want her to feel safe. She's been through more than most adults could handle." He sighed, rubbing his chin. "I can't discuss the case outside the court, but—" "Mrs. Carter, these situations are complicated. Biological ties carry legal weight." "I know," I whispered. "But love carries life." He looked at me for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "Sometimes, that's enough." When he left, I watched his car disappear down the street and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, hope. Grace came downstairs, hugging her bear. "Was he nice?" she asked. I smiled. "He was more than nice." She looked relieved. "Do you think he'll let me stay?" "I think," I said softly, brushing her hair back, "that he saw what I see, a brave, beautiful girl who deserves peace." She smiled, small but real. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how much had changed since the day Grace arrived with her purple suitcase. How she had brought laughter back into this quiet house. How her drawings now filled the refrigerator, but also how fragile everything still was, one decision away from being taken. Sometime after midnight, I heard soft footsteps. Grace stood by our bedroom door, tears on her cheeks. "I had a dream," she whispered. "He came and took me." I got up and wrapped her in my arms. "It was just a dream, baby. You're safe." She held on tight. "Promise?" "Promise," I said, even though fear whispered otherwise inside me. The next morning, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. A letter on the porch. No envelope. Just a folded note with my name written neatly on the front. I opened it and gasped when I saw the signature. Judge Thompson. It read, "Mrs. Carter, thank you for welcoming me into your home yesterday. I don't usually visit foster families before a case, but something in your letter moved me. I can't share details yet, but I will be visiting again soon, not as a judge, but as someone who believes in love's power to heal what the law sometimes forgets. Keep doing what you're doing. Grace is lucky to have you. Sincerely, Judge William Thompson." I read it twice, then a third time. The words weren't a ruling, but they felt like a blessing. For the first time, I felt like maybe the system wasn't against us. Maybe, just maybe, someone with authority actually saw what we saw every day, that Grace wasn't a case to be closed. She was a soul to be protected. When John came home that evening, I showed him the note. He smiled softly. "Looks like the judge has a heart after all." "Yeah," I said, tears of relief finally falling. "And maybe that's what will save her." Grace walked in, curious. "What will save me?" I knelt beside her, holding her small hands in mine. "Love, sweetheart. Just love." She tilted her head. "That's what you always say. And it's always true." That night, as rain fell softly outside, Grace finally slept without nightmares, but deep inside, I knew the hardest part was still coming, the final hearing. The moment that would decide if she stayed in our lives forever or disappeared back into the system that had already failed her too many times. And when that day came, I would not walk into that courtroom alone, because the man who had seen us, the judge with kind eyes, would make sure love finally had a voice. The morning of the final hearing was gray and cold. The kind of morning that made the sky look heavy and the world feel like it was holding its breath. Grace was unusually quiet. She sat on the couch, holding her stuffed bear in one arm and a tiny silver star charm in the other. I had given it to her last night, a small pendant shaped like a star. I told her it meant hope. Now, she clutched it tightly, as if it could protect her. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to," I reminded her gently. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I know." John was pacing near the door, dressed in his dark suit, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. "We should go," he said softly. The drive to the courthouse was silent. The wipers moved back and forth across the windshield, fighting the drizzle. I kept glancing at Grace through the rearview mirror, her small face pressed against the window, watching the raindrops race down the glass. When we arrived, the courthouse steps looked enormous. Grace hesitated at the bottom. I reached out my hand. "We'll walk together," I said. She took it. Inside, everything smelled of polished floors and old paper. The walls were lined with portraits of judges long gone. Grace's small sneakers squeaked against the tile as we walked. When we entered the courtroom, Kyle was already there, sitting at his lawyer's table. He looked different, cleaner, calmer, but his eyes still carried the weight of years gone wrong. He glanced at Grace and gave a nervous smile. She turned away quickly. The bailiff called out, "All rise." Judge Thompson entered, wearing his black robe, his expression solemn but kind. I felt a flicker of relief just seeing him. We sat down as the hearing began. Kyle's lawyer went first. He stood tall, confident, with polished shoes and a rehearsed voice. "Your Honor," he began, "my client, Mr. Kyle Parker, is a man who made mistakes, but he's worked hard to correct them. He's been sober for over a year, holds steady employment, and has completed all state-mandated parenting programs. He simply wishes for the chance to be in his daughter's life again." I looked at Kyle. He didn't meet my eyes, The lawyer continued, while we understand and appreciate the care provided by the foster family, we must remember that the bond between biological parent and child is sacred and legally prioritized under the state's reunification policy. The words biological parent stung more than I expected. I wasn't her biological mother. I couldn't argue that. But I was her mother in every way that mattered. When it was our turn, my attorney, a kind woman named Laura Bennett, stood up. Your Honor, she began, we don't deny that Mr. Parker has made progress. But progress does not erase the pain a child has endured. Grace is not an object to be returned when convenient. She is a child who has found love, safety, and stability in the Carters' home. To remove her now would be a second trauma. She paused, letting the words sink in. Sometimes, she continued, biology creates life. But love creates family. The judge nodded slowly, then said, Thank you, Ms. Bennett. I'd like to hear from Grace. My heart skipped a beat. Grace looked at me, terrified. I squeezed her hand. You can do this, baby. Just tell the truth. She stood up, small and trembling, and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore her in gently. She sat down, her feet barely touching the floor. Judge Thompson smiled kindly. Grace, you can take your time. I just want to know how you feel. Do you understand why we're here today? She nodded slowly. Yes. To see where I'll live. That's right. And do you have something you'd like to tell me? Grace looked down at her hands. Her voice shook as she spoke. My dad, he's trying to be better. I know that. But when I lived with him, I was scared a lot. He would leave for days. Sometimes I didn't eat. Sometimes I hid in the closet when people came to the door. A tear rolled down her cheek. The courtroom went silent. She took a deep breath. When I came to live with Emily and John, I thought they'd send me away too. But they didn't. They stayed. Even when I had nightmares, even when I got mad. They stayed. Her small voice trembled, but she didn't stop. I love them. I want to stay with them. I just want a home that doesn't go away. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. Even Kyle wiped his eyes. The judge handed her a tissue. Thank you, Grace, he said softly. You've been very brave. After Grace stepped down, Kyle stood up suddenly. Your Honor, may I speak? His lawyer tried to stop him, but the judge nodded. Go ahead. Kyle's voice was rough, like gravel. She's right. I left her. I was a mess back then. I thought getting clean would fix everything, but it doesn't change what I did. He looked at me, then at Grace. When I saw her at that store, she looked happy. Safe. I wanted that for her. But I wanted to be the one to give it to her. I see now I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He swallowed hard, voice breaking. I just don't want her to hate me. Grace looked at him, her eyes full of pain and something else, forgiveness. I don't hate you, she whispered. That broke everyone. Even the clerk behind the judge's desk wiped her eyes. The judge leaned back, thoughtful, his hands folded. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the air vent. Finally, he spoke. This is one of those cases that remind us why the law and the heart often disagree. Mr. Parker, I believe in redemption, but I also believe in timing. Grace needs stability now, not someday. And Mrs. Carter, he looked at me, his eyes kind. You've given her that. He paused, then said the words that made my knees go weak, effective immediately. The court grants full legal custody of Grace Parker to Emily and John Carter. The adoption process may proceed. I gasped. Grace cried out softly and threw her arms around me. John held us both, tears streaming down his face. Even Kyle smiled through his tears. Take care of her, he said quietly. I will, I whispered. I promise. As we left the courtroom, reporters were waiting in the hallway, but I didn't care. All I saw was Grace, her little hand clutching mine, smiling for the first time without fear. The rain outside had stopped. The clouds were breaking, and a sliver of sunlight touched the courthouse steps. Can we go home now? She asked. Home, I repeated softly, the word feeling brand new. Yes, sweetheart. Let's go home. That night, we celebrated with takeout pizza and ice cream. Grace sat on the couch in her pajamas, watching a movie, her star pendant shining in the light. Halfway through, she looked at me and said, So, am I really your daughter now? I smiled, tears in my eyes. You always were. Today, the world just caught up. She laughed, a real laugh, bright and free, and in that sound, I heard everything I had ever wanted: love, healing, and family. But I didn't know that even as we celebrated, something unexpected was already on its way. A letter that would reopen a past I thought was closed forever. And this time, it wouldn't come from the judge, but from someone who had finally decided to make peace. The days after the court hearing felt like sunlight after a long storm. Grace had officially become Grace Carter, and every time I saw her sign her new last name on her drawings or school forms, my heart swelled with something too big for words. The first week was filled with laughter and simple joys, things we'd never taken for granted before. We went out for pancakes on Saturday morning, spent Sunday planting tulips in the garden, and every night, before she went to bed, Grace would whisper, "Good night, Mom." It was the sweetest sound I'd ever known. Still, in the quiet moments, when the house was still and the moonlight poured across the wooden floor, I sometimes caught myself thinking of my own mother. It had been years since we'd spoken. When I first told my parents that I was going to foster a child, they didn't react the way I had hoped. My mother had looked at me over her teacup, her voice sharp but calm. "You can't just bring someone else's problem into your home, Emily." "It's not someone's problem, Mom," I'd said softly. "It's a child. She needs a family." My father had sighed and turned away. They'd always cared about appearances, about order and reputation. When I went through with it anyway, they didn't come to visit. Not when I first took Grace in, not on her birthday, not even during the hearing. But now, sitting on the porch one quiet morning, sipping coffee as the autumn wind played with the leaves, I heard the mail truck pull up. The driver waved, leaving a single white envelope in the box. I almost didn't notice it until I saw the handwriting. It was delicate, slanted, and instantly recognizable. My mother's handwriting. I held the letter for a long time before opening it. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of all the years that had passed between us. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. The faint scent of her perfume clung to it, the same one she used to wear when she'd tuck me into bed as a child. I sat down on the porch steps, took a deep breath, and began to read. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, I suppose I've found the courage I should have had years ago. I heard about the court case, about the little girl, Grace, and about what you did for her. I know I don't deserve to say this, but I'm proud of you. I know I've been hard. I said things I shouldn't have. Your father and I thought we were protecting you, protecting the life we wanted you to have. But all we really did was push you away. I was wrong, Emily. You were right. Family isn't about bloodlines or names. It's about the ones who stay, even when it's hard. You gave that little girl something I couldn't give you when you needed it: unconditional love. If you'll let me, I'd like to meet her someday. I'd like to see you too. I don't know how to fix what I broke, but I'd like to try. With love, Mom." By the time I finished reading, my vision was blurred by tears. The words had come too late, and yet, somehow, just in time. I sat there for a long while, listening to the sound of the wind in the trees. A part of me wanted to tear the letter apart, to hold on to the hurt a little longer. But another part, the part that had grown stronger since Grace came into my life, whispered softly, "Forgive." That evening, Grace found me sitting by the window, the letter folded neatly beside me. "Mom," she said, gently tilting her head. "Why are you sad?" I smiled faintly. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking about someone I used to know." "Did they hurt you?" she asked, her big brown eyes full of concern. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. But sometimes people hurt us because they don't know how to love the right way." She thought about that for a moment, then said something that took my breath away. "Then maybe you can teach her. You're really good at loving the right way." I felt my heart ache, not from pain, but from something pure. The next morning, I took out my old stationery, the kind I hadn't used in years. I sat at the kitchen table, pen poised above the paper, unsure where to begin. Finally, I wrote, "Dear Mom, thank you for your letter. I won't lie, it hurt to read your words, but it also healed something inside me. I've spent years trying to understand why we drifted apart, and maybe now I don't have to. Maybe we both just did the best we could with what we knew. Grace is doing beautifully. She's funny, brave, and has a heart big enough to forgive the world. I think you'd like her. And if you'd like to meet her, really meet her, I'd like that too. Love, Emily. It took me 3 days to find the courage to send the letter, and when I did, I wasn't sure what to expect, or if I expected anything at all. But one chilly afternoon, a few weeks later, the doorbell rang. Grace ran to answer it, her hair bouncing as she called, "I'll get it." I followed behind her, drying my hands on a towel. When I reached the door, my breath caught. Standing there, holding a bouquet of daisies, was my mother. Time had softened her, her hair grayer, her face lined with years, but her eyes were the same. For a long moment, we just stood there, both unsure what to say. Then Grace, never one to fear silence, asked, "Are you Grandma?" My mother blinked, tears instantly filling her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "I think I am." Grace smiled, that innocent, disarming smile that melted walls like ice in the sun. "Do you want to see my room?" And, just like that, the years of anger and silence began to fade. Later that evening, after Grace had gone to bed, my mother and I sat in the kitchen with cups of tea between us, just like old times, only softer now. She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Emily," she said, her voice trembling. "I missed so much of your life." I squeezed her hand gently. "You're here now. That's what matters." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "You're a better mother than I ever was." I shook my head. "I'm just trying to be what I needed." She nodded slowly. "And you became that, not just for Grace, but for me too." As the night deepened, we talked about the past, about Grace, about the future. It wasn't perfect. There were pauses, awkward moments, words we couldn't quite say, but there was something new, something fragile but real: forgiveness. When she finally stood to leave, she hugged me tightly, for the first time in years. I hugged her back without hesitation. As she stepped outside, she looked up at the sky and said, "You named her well, Emily. Grace suits her." I smiled softly. "Yes," I said. She gave us both some. That night, as I tucked Grace into bed, she asked sleepily, "Mom, do you think families can start over?" I brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I think that's exactly what families are made for." She smiled, half asleep. "Then I'm glad we started ours." I watched her drift into dreams, her star pendant catching the glow of the nightlight, and as I turned off the lamp, I whispered a silent thank you to Grace, to my mother, and to life itself, for reminding me that love doesn't erase the past. It simply gives it a softer place to rest. The first winter after Grace's adoption was the kind of season that wrapped our little town in silence. Snow blanketed the rooftops like a soft white quilt, and the trees outside our home glistened with frost. Grace loved it. Every morning before school, she'd press her face against the window and whisper, "It looks like the world's been frosted with sugar." Then she'd laugh, her voice echoing through the quiet house, melting away the cold. We had finally found our rhythm, a new life that felt whole. Even my mother had become part of it, visiting every weekend, helping Grace bake cookies and telling her stories about when your mom was your age. It was peace, real, rare peace. But sometimes life waits until you've exhaled before it strikes again. It started one morning with a letter, not like the one from my mother. This one was from the State Department of Child Services, the same department that had once approved our adoption. The envelope was thicker this time, the kind that made your stomach drop before you even opened it. John found it first. He walked into the kitchen, holding it like it might break. "Emily," he said quietly, "you'd better read this." I took it, my hands already cold. Grace was upstairs getting ready for school, humming a tune to herself. I opened the letter, and the world seemed to tilt. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Carter, this letter serves as notification of a petition to reopen the custody case of minor Grace Parker Carter. A request has been submitted for a review of adoption validity due to new documentation regarding the biological father's legal status. A court hearing has been scheduled for February 12th. Sincerely, Department of Child Services. For a moment, I couldn't speak. All I could hear was the clock ticking on the kitchen wall. John's voice broke the silence. New documentation, he said, his brow furrowed. What does that even mean? I read the letter again. It means Kyle's trying to challenge the adoption. John shook his head. But he agreed in court. He gave his consent. I know. My throat tightened. But something must have changed. I folded the letter, my hands trembling. He's trying to take her back. That evening, after Grace went to bed, John and I sat in the living room, the fireplace flickering between us. He was angry, not the loud kind, but the kind that simmers. He had his chance, Emily. He had his chance. Why no? I didn't have an answer. All I could think of was Grace, her laughter, her quiet bravery, her fragile peace. She can't go through that again, I whispered. John reached for my hand. She won't. We won't let it happen. The next morning, I called Laura Bennett, our lawyer. She listened carefully, then sighed. Emily, I've seen this before. Sometimes, biological parents try to challenge finalized adoptions when they feel remorse or find loopholes. Don't panic yet. The courts rarely reverse them without strong evidence. What kind of evidence? I asked. Usually fraud, misrepresentation, or proof that due process wasn't followed. But none of that happened. I know, she said gently. But we still have to be ready. I'll handle the paperwork. You just focus on Grace. I thanked her, but the fear wouldn't leave. That night, as I tucked Grace into bed, she looked up at me with sleepy eyes. Mom, she murmured, you look worried. Is something wrong? I forced a smile. No, sweetheart. Everything's fine. Just grown-up stuff. She nodded, half asleep, and curled up under her blanket. But after I turned off the light, I stood there in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe, watching her chest rise and fall, and praying silently that no one would ever take her from me again. The weeks leading up to the hearing were heavy. Every day felt longer than the last. Even small things, Grace's laughter, the smell of her shampoo, her tiny socks on the laundry line, made me ache with fear of losing them. John tried to stay calm, but I saw it in his eyes, and my mother, who came over one afternoon, found me staring at the snow through the window, tears silently running down my face. She came up behind me and wrapped her arms around me. Sweetheart, she whispered, you've fought for her once. You can fight again. I'm tired, Mom, I said softly. I'm so tired of fighting. She smiled sadly. That's what makes you strong, Emily. You fight even when you're tired. That's what mothers do. When the day of the hearing arrived, the courthouse felt different this time, colder, heavier. Grace stayed home with my mother. John and I walked through the marble halls together, hand in hand, trying to breathe. Kyle was already there, sitting beside a new attorney. He looked nervous but determined. When our eyes met, there was no hatred, just a strange sadness between us. The judge, this time a woman named Judge Martinez, looked through the files carefully. Then she spoke. Mr. Parker, I've read your petition. It says here you recently discovered that your parental termination order was filed under an outdated legal address, and therefore you're claiming due process was violated. Is that correct? Kyle nodded, his voice low. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have evidence that you were unaware of the termination at the time it was filed? He hesitated, then handed over a small folder. His lawyer spoke up. Your Honor, my client has obtained documentation proving that his mail was misdirected during that time. He was never properly notified of the hearing that finalized the adoption. Laura, our attorney, rose immediately. Your Honor, Mr. Parker was present at the final adoption hearing. He testified himself. There's no question he was aware and consenting. This petition is not only unfounded, but emotionally damaging to the child. The judge leaned back, thoughtful. I'll review all documentation before making a decision. Until then, I'll issue a temporary hold on any custody changes. The words temporary hold felt like ice in my veins. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by Grace's bed for hours, watching her sleep, her hair tangled like golden threads across the pillow. She had no idea that her entire life was being debated in rooms filled with strangers and papered. I couldn't let that happen again. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went to see Kyle. He lived in a small apartment on the edge of town, a modest place with peeling paint, but tidy enough to show he was trying. When he opened the door, surprise crossed his face. Emily. I didn't think you'd come. I had to, I said quietly. He stepped aside, letting me in. The place smelled faintly of coffee and sawdust, maybe from his job at the carpentry shop. I need to know why, I said finally. Why no? Why reopen old wounds? Kyle sat down, rubbing his hands together. Because I'm scared, he admitted. I keep seeing her in my dreams. The day she looked at me in court, it broke me. I thought I could move on, but I can't. I sighed, feeling my anger fade into something softer. You don't need to destroy her peace to ease your guilt. He looked up, eyes glistening. I don't want to take her from you, Emily. I just want to know her. Maybe have a chance to see her sometimes. To show her I'm not the man who hurt her anymore. I stared at him, stunned. Then why didn't you just ask? He let out a shaky laugh. Because I didn't think you'd say yes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, silent, endless. Finally, I said, if you really want to be in her life, Kyle, then you have to prove it, not with papers, but with patience. With kindness. She deserves that. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I'll withdraw the petition. When I walked out into the cold, I looked up at the sky, flakes drifting down like tiny blessings. I didn't know if it was peace or just another pause, but it was enough. A week later, we received the official notice. Case closed. Adoption remains final. I read the words out loud to John, my voice trembling with relief. He pulled me close, whispering, it's over. But I knew it wasn't really over, not for Kyle. Not for Grace, and maybe not even for me, because sometimes the storms don't destroy what we've built, they test if it's strong enough to last, and ours was, that night. As Grace sat by the fire drawing a picture of our family, me, John, Grandma, and her, she added something new in the corner. A small figure standing beneath a tree, smiling. Who's that? I asked gently. She looked up at me with calm eyes. That's my dad. He's part of my story too. I nodded slowly, tears rising again, but this time, they were warm. Yes, I whispered. He is. The snow had melted by the time spring arrived. The tulips we'd planted months ago were pushing through the damp soil, their bright colors breaking through the gray of winter. Grace loved to check on them every morning before school. She'd crouch in the garden in her little rain boots, whispering to each flower like they were her friends. This one's almost ready, she'd say, smiling. I watched her from the porch, sipping coffee, feeling grateful for the peace that had returned. The custody battle was over. The papers were final. The fear had finally quieted, but something else lingered, a quiet thought that visited me in the stillness of the mornings. Kyle. He'd kept his word. After withdrawing the petition, he'd sent one short message through our lawyer. Thank you for hearing me. I'll wait until Grace is ready. That had been a month ago, and though a part of me wanted to close that chapter forever, another part, the mother in me, knew that closure doesn't come from silence. It comes from facing what's left unfinished. It was a Saturday morning when Grace asked the question I'd been half expecting and half dreading. We were in the kitchen, baking blueberry muffins, her favorite. She stirred the batter carefully, tongue poking out in concentration. Mom. Yes, sweetheart. She hesitated, then said softly, do you think my dad still thinks about me? The question hit like a soft, but heavy stone. I set down the whisk. Why do you ask, honey? She shrugged. I don't know. Sometimes I remember him. The good parts, I guess. I don't want to forget everything, even if it was bad. I looked at her, so young, yet so wise. She had her father's eyes, that same deep hazel, full of sadness and hope tangled together. I think he does, I said gently. Every day, probably. She looked down at her hands. Do you think I could see him? Just to talk. I felt my heart tighten. Every instinct in me screamed to protect her, to keep her safe from anything that could hurt again. But then I thought of Kyle's face when he'd said, I just want to show her I'm not the man who hurt her anymore. Maybe this was the moment to test if that was true. Maybe, I said slowly. If you're sure that's what you want. She nodded, her little voice steady. I think I need to. That night, I called Kyle. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. Emily? Hi, I said, hesitating. Grace wants to see you. Just for a short visit. Here, at our house. There was silence, and then a breath that sounded almost like relief. Are you sure? He asked softly. Yes, I said. But it has to be on her terms. She decides when it's over. Of course, he said quickly. I'll do whatever she needs. We set the visit for the following Sunday. The days leading up to it were strange. Grace seemed both nervous and excited. She cleaned her room twice, picked out her favorite dress, and even drew a picture of a small red house with 3 people standing in front, me, her, and Kyle. When I asked what it was, she said, it's not real. Just how I wish things were before everything got messy. It broke my heart, but I smiled anyway. You have such a big heart, Grace. She smiled shyly. I got it from you. Sunday came with sunshine. The air was crisp, the sky impossibly blue. John had offered to be there, but I told him I wanted it to just be the 3 of us. He understood. I baked cookies, not because it was special, but because the smell made everything feel warmer, safer. When the doorbell finally rang, Grace froze. Her hands gripped the edge of her chair. I walked over and opened the door. Kyle stood there, holding a small stuffed fox, worn, but clean. His eyes searched mine, nervous but gentle. Hi, he said softly. Thank you for letting me come. I stepped aside. She's in the living room. When Grace saw him, she didn't move right away. He knelt down slowly, keeping his distance. Hey, Gracie, he said, his voice trembling. You got taller. She blinked, unsure. You remember that nickname? Of course I do, he said quietly. I remember everything. For a long moment, there was silence. Just sunlight filtering through the curtains and the clock ticking softly on the wall. Then Grace stood up and took a small step forward. Did you bring that for me? She asked, nodding at the stuffed fox. He smiled weakly. It was yours, remember? I found it when I moved. I thought maybe you'd want it back. She took it gently, running her fingers over the soft fabric. I used to sleep with this every night, she whispered. I know, he said. You used to call it Mr. Fox. She smiled faintly. You remember that too. The visit went on for about an hour. At first, the conversation was cautious, like walking across thin ice. Carl told her about his job at the carpentry shop, about how he was trying to build a small workshop of his own. Grace told him about school, her art projects, and the tulips we'd planted. He listened intently, eyes full of pride and regret. When it was time for him to leave, Grace looked at him and said, You can come again, if Mom says it's okay. Kyle's eyes filled with tears. I'd like that very much. He turned to me. Thank you, Emily. I know you didn't have to do this. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't see the man who'd caused so much pain. I saw a father trying to make peace with the past. She's not just your second chance, Kyle, I said quietly. She's your reminder. Don't waste it. He nodded, voice breaking. I won't. After he left, Grace stood by the window for a long time, watching his car disappear down the street. I went to her and knelt beside her. How do you feel? She shrugged, thinking carefully. A little sad. A little happy. But mostly lighter. Lighter? I repeated, smiling. Yeah, she said softly. Like I let go of something heavy. I hugged her tight. That's what forgiveness feels like, sweetheart. She nodded against my shoulder. Then I think I forgave him. That evening, my mother called. When I told her about the visit, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You did the right thing, Emily. It takes strength to protect, but it takes even more to forgive. I looked at Grace, now curled on the couch with Mr. Fox in her arms, drawing a picture of tulips. I think she's teaching me more than I'm teaching her, I said softly. My mother chuckled. That's what children do. They remind us who we were meant to be. That night, as I tucked Grace into bed, she asked, Mom, do you think people can really change? I thought of Kyle, of the letter, the courtroom, the pain, and now the quiet redemption beginning to bloom. Yes, I said. If they want to. But sometimes change starts when someone believes they can. She smiled sleepily. Like you believed in me? I brushed her hair gently. Exactly like that. She yawned, curling closer to her stuffed fox. Then maybe you believed in him too, she murmured, before drifting into dreams. Her words stayed with me long after she fell asleep. In the quiet darkness, I realized she was right. Forgiveness isn't about excusing the past. It's about freeing the future, and maybe that's what real family is, a circle wide enough for both pain and peace to sit side by side. Summer came with warm winds and blooming gardens. The tulips had given way to roses now red, soft, and fragrant. Climbing along the wooden fence that John built last spring, Grace loved watering them in the evenings. She'd hum to herself, barefoot on the grass, her curls bouncing in the golden light. Sometimes I'd watch her from the kitchen window, feeling this strange ache of gratitude, the kind that sits in your chest when life, after all its storms, finally gives you peace. It had been almost 4 months since Kyle's first visit. Since then, he'd come by twice, both short, gentle meetings that left Grace smiling but thoughtful. He was careful, respectful. He always called ahead, always asked what Grace felt comfortable with. He never pushed, and slowly, the fear that used to live between us began to dissolve, not forgotten, but softened. One Saturday morning in July, Grace came into my room holding a folded piece of paper behind her back. "Mom," she said, grinning, "I have something to show you, but you have to promise not to laugh." "I promise," I said, smiling. She handed me the paper. Inside was a list written in bright purple marker, decorated with tiny hearts and stars. At the top, she'd written, "My birthday wish list, for real this time." Her birthday was in 2 weeks. She'd been talking about it for months. At first, it was all toys and roller skates and maybe a puppy. But now, as I scanned the paper, I realized this was something else entirely. Have dinner with Mom, John, Grandma, and Grandpa. Invite Dad, if it's okay. Eat strawberry cake, not chocolate, because that's Dad's favorite. Play my favorite song and dance in the yard. Take a picture of everyone together. I looked up at her, trying not to let my voice crack. "This is a beautiful list, Grace." She smiled shyly. "Do you think we can make it happen?" I hesitated. "Even number 2? She nodded. "Especially number 2. I think. I want everyone to see that we can be okay. All of us." Her eyes were clear, steady, and brave. It struck me, in that moment, how much she'd grown. Not just taller or older, but wiser. Her heart carried a grace far beyond her years. That night, I talked to John. We sat on the porch under the fading sunset, the air warm and humming with crickets. "She wants to invite him," I said quietly. "For her birthday." John thought for a long time, then nodded slowly. "It's her day. If that's what she wants, we'll make it work." I looked at him, grateful. "You're okay with that?" He smiled softly. "Emily, I married you knowing your life was full of love, and some of that love came from the people who hurt you before. I can't erase them, but I can help make sure their shadows don't touch her." I reached for his hand. "You're a good man." He chuckled. "Just trying to keep up with my wife." The next day, I called Kyle. He was silent for a long moment when I told him. "She really wants me there," he asked, voice trembling. "She does," I said. "But there are rules. You respect the space. You don't make it about the past. Just be her dad for one day, the dad she remembers from before." He swallowed hard. "I can do that. Thank you, Emily. Truly." The week before Grace's birthday, the whole house was alive with excitement. She painted paper lanterns, helped me bake cookies, and even convinced John to hang fairy lights in the yard. "I want it to feel magical," she said. "Like a storybook." It did. The night before, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Mom, what if it doesn't go well?" I brushed her hair back gently. "Then it doesn't. But at least you'll know you tried, and that's what makes you brave." She smiled sleepily. "You always know what to say." The next evening was warm and golden, the kind of summer night that feels like it was made for memories. The yard looked beautiful. The table was set with candles and wildflowers. Grace had picked herself. My parents arrived first, carrying homemade apple pie and their usual mix of nerves and excitement. Then John came out with the grill, wearing his old King of the Barbecue apron, which made Grace giggle. And then Kyle arrived. He parked at the curb, carrying a small wrapped box. His shirt was freshly pressed, his hair neat. He looked nervous, but determined. Grace ran to the gate, not to hug him, not yet, but to wave. "Hi, Dad." He smiled, that same soft, uncertain smile I remembered from years ago. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Dinner was peaceful. There was laughter, light conversation, even a few shared jokes. At first, everyone was tense, but Grace had a way of softening every edge. She talked about school, about her art, about the garden. Kyle listened, genuinely. He complimented her drawings, asked questions about her friends, and even thanked John for the meal. At one point, my father, who'd been quiet most of the evening, leaned over to me and said softly, "He looks different." "He is," I whispered. "At least, I hope so." When it was time for cake, Grace stood up and said, "Wait. Before we blow out the candles, everyone has to say one nice thing about someone else at the table." We all laughed, but she was serious. So we went around the table. John said something kind about my cooking. My mom thanked my dad for his patience. Even Kyle smiled and said, "I'm grateful Emily never gave up on Grace." When it was Grace's turn, she looked around at all of us and said, "I'm thankful that we're all here, even if it took a long time to get here." Then she closed her eyes and made her wish. I don't know what she wished for, but when she blew out the candles, the way her face glowed in that candlelight, I had a feeling it had already come true. Later that night, as the guests left and the lights dimmed, Kyle stayed back for a moment. "Thank you, Emily," he said quietly, "for trusting me with this." I nodded. "She deserves peace." "So do you. Just don't make me regret it." He smiled sadly. "I won't. I promise." He hesitated, then said softly, "You've done an incredible job." "She's happy, I can see that." "Yeah," I said, looking at the yard full of fairy lights and melted candles. "She is." For the first time in a long while. He nodded once, then walked away, his figure fading into the soft glow of the streetlight. When I went inside, Grace was already half asleep, clutching a framed photo to her chest. I gently pulled it closer to look. It was the picture John had taken earlier that night, all of us together, smiling. I in the corner, she'd written in her neat, wobbly handwriting, "My family, all the pieces, finally together." I felt my eyes sting as I kissed her forehead. "Happy birthday, my love," I whispered. "You're the reason we all found our way home." That night, as I turned off the lights and looked out the window at the quiet yard, I realized something beautiful. Family isn't perfect. It's not always made of the people we start with. Sometimes, it's made of the ones who choose to stay and the ones who find the courage to come back. And in that truth, there's grace. There's forgiveness. There's love, quiet, messy, real love. Autumn came gently that year. The trees along the street turned shades of amber and gold, and the air smelled like rain and apple pie. Grace was now 10, curious, thoughtful, and growing fast. She loved helping me decorate the house for the season. Together, we strung up orange lights, set pumpkins on the porch, and baked more pies than anyone could possibly eat. But one Saturday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Something that would change the way she saw everything we'd been through. It started with a simple chore. "Mom, can I go get the fall decorations from the attic?" Grace asked. "Sure," I said. "They're in the big blue box. Just be careful, the floorboards near the window are a little loose." She nodded, pulling on her favorite flannel shirt and marching up the stairs like a little soldier on a mission. I stayed downstairs, folding laundry and humming to myself. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak from above. Then, after a few minutes, I heard her call out, not with panic, but surprise, "Mom, there's something up here." When I climbed up, I found her kneeling beside an old trunk I hadn't seen in years. It was tucked behind boxes of photo albums and Christmas ornaments, covered in a thin film of dust. My heart skipped a beat. I recognized it instantly. It was my parents' trunk. The one that used to sit at the foot of their bed when I was a child. "Where did this come from?" Grace asked, brushing dust from the top. I hesitated. "It must have been moved up here when we cleared out their house after Grandpa passed. Can we open it?" I nodded slowly. "Sure. Just be gentle." The hinges creaked as we lifted the lid. Inside were old quilts, faded photographs, and stacks of letters tied with ribbon. The smell of old paper and lavender filled the air, that familiar scent of my mother's perfume. Grace picked up a photo, my parents, young and smiling, standing in front of a tiny house with peeling paint. "Wow," she said softly. "Grandma looks so happy here." "She was," I said, smiling wistfully. "That was their first home." She dug a little deeper and found a small envelope tucked beneath a bundle of letters. It was yellowed with age and sealed with wax dot on the front. Written in my father's neat handwriting were the words, "For Emily, to be opened when she's ready." Grace looked at me, eyes wide. "It's for you, Mom." My breath caught. My father had written that, years before he passed. My hands trembled slightly as I took the envelope. "Mom," Grace whispered, "do you want me to go?" I shook my head. "No, honey. Stay. I think I want to share this with you." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded letter, the paper fragile and soft from time. The handwriting was familiar, strong, steady, and full of warmth. I began to read aloud. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer there to tell you what I should have said long ago. I know we didn't always agree, especially about the choices you made, but I need you to understand something. When you chose to take in Grace, your mother and I were scared. We'd seen you hurt before, and we thought protecting you meant saying no. But we were wrong. Love isn't about safety. It's about courage, the courage to open your heart again even when it's been broken. I watched you grow into a woman who could turn pain into strength. You always saw the good in others, even when the world told you not to. I see that same light in Grace. She is your mirror, Emily, a reflection of the love you give so freely. One day, she'll ask about her story. Tell her everything, not just the pain, but the grace that carried you both through it, and tell her that her grandfather loved her long before he ever met her. With all my love, Dad." The attic was silent. I could barely finish reading before the tears started falling. Grace moved closer and hugged me tightly. "He loved you so much, Mom." I nodded, my voice trembling. "He did. And he loved you too. He just didn't get the chance to say it." She pulled back slightly, eyes shining. "I think he knew I'd find it with you." That broke me in the softest, purest way. We sat there for a while, surrounded by memories and dust and sunlight streaming through the attic window. It felt like my father was there, just for a moment, like his voice still echoed through the walls. When we went downstairs, Grace asked if she could keep the letter in her scrapbook. "It's part of our story," she said. "It belongs with the rest." So we placed it carefully between the pages, right next to a photo of her blowing out candles on her last birthday, surrounded by everyone she loved. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grace curled up next to me on the couch. "Mom," she said quietly, "was it hard for you when Grandma and Grandpa didn't understand?" I nodded. "Very. But sometimes people's fear looks like anger. They thought they were protecting me, but really, they were just afraid of losing me." She thought about that for a while. "Do you think they'd be proud now?" I smiled softly. "I think they already are." Later that night, after Grace went to bed, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter of my own. "Dear Dad, thank you for believing in me, even when it took you a lifetime to say it. Grace found your letter today. You'd love her. She's brave, kind, and has your stubborn heart. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't just heal the living. It heals what's left behind, too. Love always, Emily." I folded it carefully and placed it back in the old trunk. It felt like closing a circle that had been open for far too long. The next morning, Grace found me in the garden, watering the roses. "Mom," she said, holding a small jar, "I want to keep some petals from these flowers." "Why?" I asked, smiling. "For Grandpa," she said simply. "So I can show him what grew here, what he helped us grow, even if he didn't know it." And in that quiet moment, watching her kneel by the roses, the sunlight glinting off her hair, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, complete peace. Because sometimes love doesn't end with loss. Sometimes it leaves a letter behind, waiting to be found, right when your heart is ready to hear it. Winter came softly that year, not harsh or heavy, but gentle, like the world was finally ready to rest. The snow blanketed the garden, covering the rose bushes and the little stepping stones Grace had painted in summer. The air outside was cold and quiet, but inside, our home glowed with warmth, the fireplace crackled, and the smell of cinnamon and pine filled every corner. Grace sat by the fire, sketching in her notebook, a new habit she'd picked up lately. She'd gotten good at it, too. Her drawings weren't just beautiful, they told stories. Sometimes I'd see one of a little girl standing in the rain, holding a paper heart. Other times, it would be a family sitting together beneath a big oak tree, their faces peaceful. I used to wonder if she drew from memory, or from hope, but now I realized it didn't matter. Because both came from love. It had been nearly a year since that letter in the attic. So much had changed, quietly, slowly, beautifully. Kyle had become part of Grace's life again, carefully and respectfully. He didn't try to replace the family we'd built, and he never overstepped. Instead, he showed up for school recitals, for birthday dinners, even for lazy Saturday breakfasts sometimes. He had a new calm about him. A humility that made his presence feel safe. It wasn't about making up for the past anymore. It was about showing up for the future. John accepted him, too, not as a friend, but as a man who'd chosen redemption over regret. The two of them even worked together once, fixing the roof on our garage after a storm. Grace had watched from the porch, giggling, calling them my two dads. The first time she said it, Kyle froze, unsure if he should smile. But John just laughed and said, "Well, she's not wrong." I think that was the moment they both stopped fighting ghosts. Around the holidays, my mother came to visit. She'd gotten slower, softer, but her eyes still sparkled with that same fierce light. As we decorated the tree, she said quietly, "You know, Emily, your father was right about you. You've always found your way home, no matter how far life took you." I smiled, tying a silver ribbon around a branch. It took a while, though. She patted my hand. The best journeys always do. Then she looked over at Grace, who was hanging a tiny handmade ornament, a paper heart with the words, "Our family," written in gold marker. "She's got your spirit," my mother said softly. "And maybe a little of mine, too." I laughed. That's probably true. A few days before Christmas, Grace came into my room carrying her sketchbook. "Mom," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "I finished it." "Finished what?" I asked. "My book," she said proudly, holding it out. "It's called The House with the Blue Door." I smiled, recognizing the title, Our House, with its weathered blue front door that John had painted the first summer we moved in. I turned the pages slowly. Each drawing told a piece of our story, a little girl arriving in a new home, scared but hopeful, a mother learning to love again, a family learning forgiveness, and on the very last page, Grace had drawn a picture of our house under a night sky filled with stars. At the bottom, in her small, careful handwriting, she'd written, "Home isn't where you start. It's where you're finally seen, loved, and forgiven." My throat tightened. I looked at her, eyes shimmering. "Grace," I whispered, "this is beautiful." She smiled softly. "It's our story, Mom. I just drew it so we don't forget." That evening, we sat together by the fire, watching the snow fall outside. John played soft music in the background while I read from an old journal. Carl stopped by for a cup of cocoa. He stayed just long enough to hang one small gift under the tree and kiss Grace's forehead goodnight. As the door closed behind him, Grace looked at me. "Do you think Dad's happy now?" I nodded. "I think he's finally found peace, like we did." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Then I think Grandpa's happy too." I smiled, remembering my father's letter. "Yes, sweetheart. I think he is." Later that night, after Grace went to bed, I stepped outside for a moment. The air was cold, crisp, and full of stars. The world felt still, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something gentle to happen. I looked at the blue door. The one that had seen so much, the tears, the laughter, the storms, the healing, and I realized it wasn't just a house anymore. It was a story, a promise, a sanctuary built from forgiveness and faith. Behind that door were all the pieces of my life. The child I'd loved, the pain I'd carried, the people I'd forgiven, and the home we'd built from the ashes of our mistakes. I closed my eyes, whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, and went back inside. The next morning, Christmas morning, Grace woke up early, as always. She raced into my room, jumping onto the bed. Mom, it's snowing again. I laughed, sitting up. Of course it is. It's Christmas. It's supposed to. She handed me a small envelope. It's my gift for you, she said. Grinning, I opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing of me, standing in front of our house, holding her hand. Above us, in looping letters, she'd written, "Thank you for choosing me every day." That was it. That was all it said, and yet it was everything. That evening, when everyone gathered for dinner, my mother, John, Kyle, and Grace, there was laughter, light, and that soft hum of peace that comes when you finally stop running from your past. As we raised our glasses for a toast, I looked around the table at the faces I loved, the memories we'd built, the second chances that somehow found their way home, to family. I said softly, "The one we're born with and the one we build." Grace smiled, her eyes shining. "To love," she added, "the kind that never gives up." We clinked our glasses, and for the first time in years, my heart didn't ache, it felt whole. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the lights had dimmed, Grace curled up beside me on the couch. Snow was falling outside again, soft and silent. "Mom," she whispered sleepily. "Do you think our story's over now?" I smiled, brushing a curl from her cheek. "No, sweetheart. I think it's just beginning." She smiled faintly, already drifting toward dreams, and as I watched her fall asleep, I realized she was right. It wasn't the ending. It was home. At last.